In the dark and eerie room of an abandoned building, two powerful beings stood facing each other. On one side, Arkham Batman, a grim and brooding figure clad in dark armor, ready for battle. On the other side, Insomniac Spider-Man, agile and quick-witted, poised for combat. Without a word spoken between them, the two video game versions of superheroes launched into a fierce and intense fight. Their every move illuminated the room with flashes of light energy, casting shadows on the decaying walls. In a separate room within the building, two prehistoric carnivores, a Gorgonopsid and a Smilodon, clashed in a brutal and primal battle. Their sharp saber fangs and claws clashed and clashed, creating shockwaves that reverberated throughout the room. Back in the main room, Batman and Spider-Man continued their relentless exchange of attacks. Spider-Man's web balls collided with Batman's batarangs, creating a dazzling display of sparks and energy. Both heroes utilized their acrobatic skills and fighting styles to gain the upper hand, each refusing to back down. Meanwhile, the Gorgonopsid and Smilodon fought on with savage ferocity. Their glowing purple eyes pulsated with power as they healed and regenerated from each other's vicious attacks. The room filled with the sound of snarls and roars as the prehistoric beasts battled on. As the hours passed, the battles raged on. Batman and Spider-Man pushed themselves to their limits, their bodies bruised and battered from the relentless combat. They fought with all the weapons and gadgets at their disposal, their every clash emitting blinding light energy. After 19 hours of non-stop fighting, both heroes finally collapsed to the ground, exhausted and defeated. The room was filled with smoke and the scent of burnt metal as they lay motionless on the floor, their costumes torn and tattered. In the separate room, the Gorgonopsid and Smilodon continued their brutal fight. The shockwaves from their collisions grew stronger and more destructive, tearing the room apart as they clashed with unparalleled ferocity. After 23 hours of relentless combat, the prehistoric carnivores finally succumbed to their wounds, collapsing on the floor in defeat. The room lay in ruins, smoke filling the air as the fighters lay defeated and motionless. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of labored breathing from the fallen warriors. The building was shrouded in darkness once more, the battles having left their mark on every corner. And so, the abandoned building bore witness to the epic clashes of heroes and beasts, a testament to the enduring power of strength and will in the face of adversity. Words. 428. The dark, abandoned building stood silently in the night, its walls covered in graffiti and its windows shattered. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the sound of dripping water echoed through the halls. In the main room, two figures stood facing each other, their eyes glowing with determination. Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man, two video game versions of legendary superheroes, prepared to battle. As the first blow was struck, a burst of light energy filled the room, illuminating the shadows and casting a haunting glow on the combatants. With each clash of fists and weapons, the light energy increased, casting a dazzling display of power and agility. Spider-Man's web balls collided with Batman's batarangs, creating explosions of light and sound that reverberated through the building. At the same time, in a separate room, two prehistoric carnivores, a Gorgonopsid and a Smilodon, engaged in a ferocious battle. Their sharp saber fangs and claws clashed with a lethal precision, generating shockwaves that shook the very foundation of the building. As the battles raged on, the fighters showed no signs of fatigue. Batman and Spider-Man utilized all their gadgets and acrobatic skills to outmaneuver each other, while the prehistoric carnivores used their glowing eyes to heal and regenerate from each other's attacks. 19 hours passed, and the fighters showed no signs of slowing down. Their bodies bruised and battered, their costumes torn and tattered, they continued to exchange blows with a relentless determination. Finally, after a grueling 23 hours of combat, the final collision between the superheroes and the prehistoric carnivores created a cataclysmic explosion of light and energy. The entire building shook as shockwaves rippled through the walls, leaving destruction in their wake. As the dust settled, the fallen bodies of the fighters lay motionless on the floor, their eyes closed in defeat. The room was filled with smoke and silence, broken only by the sound of shuffling footsteps. Shantungosaurus, a peaceful herbivorous dinosaur, entered the room and gazed at the fallen fighters with a sense of sadness. Without making a sound, it turned and walked away, leaving behind a scene of chaos and destruction. The night had been filled with spectacle and drama, but now, the only thing left was the eerie stillness of the abandoned building, haunted by the ghosts of heroes and beasts who had once battled within its walls. Words. 393. In the dark, abandoned building, two video game versions of superheroes, Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man, stood facing each other. The tension in the room was palpable as they prepared to fight. Suddenly, the air crackled with energy as the two superheroes launched into a fierce battle, their movements generating light that illuminated the entire building. Meanwhile, in a separate room, two prehistoric carnivores, a Gorgonopsid and a Smilodon, faced off against each other. With sharp, long saber fangs and claws, they clashed, each emitting shockwaves with every vicious strike. Back in the main room, Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man exchanged blows with every weapon and gadget at their disposal. Spider-Man's web balls collided with Batman's batarangs, creating dazzling displays of light energy with each collision. As the battle raged on, both superheroes utilized their acrobatic skills and unique fighting styles, the light from their clash growing brighter with each attack. The fight seemed endless, with neither hero backing down. In the separate room, the prehistoric carnivores continued their brutal battle, using their glowing purple eyes to heal and regenerate from each other's attacks. The room echoed with the sounds of their snarls and roars as they fought relentlessly. Hours passed, and the battle showed no signs of slowing down. Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man fought on, their bodies bruised and battered, their costumes torn and ragged. With one final clash, they both collapsed to the floor, motionless and defeated. In the other room, the prehistoric carnivores also fell, exhausted from their prolonged battle. The room lay in ruins, filled with smoke and devastation from the intense fight. As the dust settled, Confucius, the Shantungosaurus, entered the building. The herbivorous dinosaur surveyed the fallen bodies of the fighters before silently walking away, leaving the scene of destruction behind. The tension and thrill of the battles lingered in the air, a reminder of the fierce conflicts that had taken place within the abandoned building. The aftermath of the clashes left a sense of awe and wonder at the power and determination of the combatants, both modern-day heroes and ancient beasts. As the sun rose outside, casting its light through the broken windows of the building, the once chaotic and intense atmosphere was replaced with a sense of eerie calm. The remnants of the battles remained, a testament to the epic struggles that had unfolded within the dark confines of the abandoned building. And so, the story of the battles between Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man, as well as the prehistoric carnivores, came to a dramatic and thrilling conclusion. The events that had transpired within the building would be remembered for years to come, a tale of bravery, strength, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Words. 455. The dark room of the abandoned building was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the occasional clash of metal and flesh. In the center of the room stood two figures, their bodies illuminated by the flashes of light energy that erupted from their every move. On one side stood Arkham Batman, his cape billowing in the wind as he prepared to strike. His eyes glowed with determination as he faced off against his opponent, Insomniac Spider-Man. The web slinger crouched low, his suit gleaming in the dim light as he readied himself for the battle ahead. Without a word, the two superheroes launched themselves at each other, exchanging blows with lightning speed. Batman's batarangs clashed against Spider-Man's web balls, creating sparks that danced across the room. The sound of their combat echoed off the walls, filling the air with a symphony of violence. As the battle raged on, the building began to shake as if it could barely contain the power of the two titans locked in combat. Every punch, kick, and grapple sent shockwaves rippling through the walls, threatening to bring the entire structure crashing down around them. In a separate room, two prehistoric carnivores faced off against each other in a deadly dance of teeth and claws. The Gorgonopsid, with its razor-sharp fangs, clashed with the Smilodon, its claws bared and ready for battle. The two beasts emitted growls and roars that shook the very foundations of the building, each strike generating a shockwave that reverberated through the room. The Gorgonopsid and Smilodon fought with a ferocity that was matched only by the superheroes in the main room. Their glowing purple eyes locked onto each other, each trying to gain the upper hand in the brutal struggle for dominance. Back in the main room, Batman and Spider-Man continued their battle, each using their unique acrobatics and fighting styles to gain the upper hand. The room was filled with the bright light of their energy emissions, casting long shadows on the walls as they clashed again and again. After 19 hours of non-stop combat, both Batman and Spider-Man were exhausted, their bodies bruised and battered from the relentless fight. With one final, desperate clash, they both fell to the ground, motionless and defeated. In the separate room, the Gorgonopsid and Smilodon fought on for 23 hours straight, their bodies heaving with exertion as they clashed with all their might. The shockwaves they generated grew larger and more destructive with each collision, tearing the room apart around them. Finally, with one last titanic clash, the Gorgonopsid and Smilodon fell to the ground, defeated and motionless. The room lay in ruins, filled with smoke and debris from the epic battle that had taken place within its walls. As the silence settled over the abandoned building, Confucius, the Shantungosaurus, entered the room and surveyed the fallen bodies of the fighters. With a silent nod, he turned and walked away, leaving the heroes and beasts to their fate in the shattered remains of the once great building. Words. 510. In the dark room of the abandoned building, two video game versions of superheroes stood facing each other, Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man. Without a word, they launched into a fierce battle, their movements generating flashes of light that illuminated the entire building. As the superheroes clashed in the main room, in a separate chamber, two prehistoric carnivores, the Gorgonopsid and Smilodon, engaged in a brutal fight. The creatures clashed with their sharp fangs and claws, emitting shockwaves that shook the building to its foundations. Back in the main room, Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man exchanged blows, utilizing every weapon and gadget at their disposal. Spider-Man's web balls collided with Batman's batarangs, the clash of their acrobatic fighting styles creating a dazzling display of light energy. Hours passed as the battle raged on relentlessly. The combatants' bodies were bruised and battered, their once pristine outfits torn and tattered. Despite their exhaustion, they continued to fight with all their strength, their final clash unleashing a blinding burst of light that filled the entire room. With a final, desperate effort, Batman and Spider-Man fell to the floor, motionless and defeated. In the separate chamber, the Gorgonopsid and Smilodon also lay still, their glowing purple eyes dimmed as they succumbed to exhaustion. As the smoke cleared, Confucius, the Shantungosaurus, entered the room, surveying the fallen fighters with a solemn gaze. With a silent nod, the herbivorous dinosaur turned and walked away, leaving the ruined building behind. The battle of the superheroes and prehistoric carnivores had come to a dramatic and thrilling end, their clash of titans leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. And in the quiet aftermath, only the shadows of the fallen combatants remained, a testament to the intensity of the conflict that had unfolded within the walls of the abandoned building. Words. 301. In the dark and abandoned building, the air was thick with tension as two video game versions of superheroes, Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man, stood face to face. Without exchanging a single word, they launched into a fierce battle, their every movement creating bursts of light energy that illuminated the entire building. Meanwhile, in a separate room, two prehistoric carnivores, a Gorgonopsid and a Smilodon, clashed with savage intensity. Their sharp saber fangs and claws flashed in the dim light as they tore into each other, emitting shockwaves that rocked the room. Back in the main room, Batman and Spider-Man continued to exchange blows, using every weapon and gadget at their disposal. Spider-Man's web balls collided with Batman's batarangs, the clash of metal on metal filling the air. Both heroes employed their acrobatics and fighting styles, creating a dazzling display of combat that filled the room with light energy. As the battle raged on, the two prehistoric carnivores fought relentlessly, their glowing purple eyes allowing them to heal and regenerate from each other's attacks. The room reverberated with the sound of their growls and the clash of their fangs and claws. Hours passed, and the battle showed no signs of slowing down. Batman and Spider-Man's bodies were bruised and battered, their costumes torn and bloodied. They pushed themselves to the limit, each refusing to back down from the other. Finally, after 19 hours of non-stop fighting, both heroes collapsed to the floor, exhausted and defeated. The room was filled with smoke, the aftermath of their epic battle hanging heavy in the air. In the separate room, the prehistoric carnivores continued their brutal clash, the shockwaves from their collisions growing more and more powerful. For 23 hours, they fought with unrelenting ferocity, until their final collision created a massive shockwave that tore through the room, leaving it in ruins. As the dust settled, the two prehistoric beasts lay motionless on the floor, their eyes closed in defeat. Confucius, the Shantungosaurus, entered the room and gazed upon the fallen fighters. Without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving the building in silence. The events of that night would be whispered about for years to come, a tale of epic battles and unimaginable power that had unfolded in the dark and abandoned building. And though the fighters had long since fallen, their legacy would live on in the minds of those who had witnessed their incredible showdown. Words. 405.